Hi, can you hear me? Awesome.
Hi, Jenny.
Yes, let
I
me just scooch back a little bit.
can hear you. Can you hear me?
Mm, I think that works. Yep.
Awesome. Okay.
Cool.
Okay, awesome. We're gonna work to add our guest. Awesome.
Cool.
And now I'm just gonna invite Cedric to join us. Okay. Give it 1 second. Um, okay. I see Cedric joining. May I invite Cedric now? All right.
Thank you.
All right. Cedric, welcome. Okay, we're gonna do a quick tech check for our interpreter.
Yep.
And Jenny, are you able to hear myself and Cedric okay? Okay, awesome. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the next Conscious Conversation brought to you by Can't Stop, Won't Stop Consulting. Today, I am particularly excited about our featured guest, a movement mate, and my
Thank
brother in
you.
struggle and solidarity, Cedric
Thank
Lawson.
you. Thank you. Excited to
Um,
be here. And of
hel-
course, I'm
Hello, Cedric.
festive.
Welcome.
It is the holiday season. Here at the Leadership Conference, which I know we'll talk a little bit about in terms of my journey, we are having our holiday party today. So I'm excited to be here with y'all and then to
Oh,
celebrate this
awesome.
great holiday season and this important year in terms of the work we've been able to do in civil and human rights.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before diving into some of the questions, Cedric, I'm going to go ahead and just read a little bit of your bio for folks, so folks can have a sense of who we are engaging in conversation with today. Um, so Cedric is the field director of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and the Leadership Conference Education Fund. He is an organizer, coalescer, and field strategist, and is engaged in various Supreme Court and lower court nomination support and opposition campaigns. Cedric has organized around various issues throughout his career, from affirmative action to LGBT justice and voting rights. And additionally, he co-founded the Black Youth Project 100, an organization working to advance a better future for the Black community by pushing for shifts in economic policy. Um, and of course, beyond the work that I've been able to do with Cedric, he is a dear friend and excited to dig in. All right, so let's to kick it off, Cedric. In terms of this is a question that we ask all of our guests, and in the
It's such
spirit
a great
of
question.
Ella Baker,
And
who are your
I
people?
think of a friend of mine who not only asks, who are your people, but where are they on Sundays? And to answer this question, my people are those of
Mm,
so many intersecting identities that I hold. So my people are Black people. My people are queer people. My people are misfits and politicos. My people are the child-free ones who still are so grateful to be in community. My community is my people are people of faith in the ecumenical sense, in the sense that we are open to engaging with others in their faith and understand how we can be free together. And those are my people. And I'm so excited to be one of the lucky ones to be at the intersection of so many identities, regardless of how they may be marginalized in this country, in this world.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that because I feel like sometimes, or oftentimes rather, I know that especially as I was coming of age and kind of coming into myself, I I felt like the spaces I was in had to ask me to kind of silo or choose which of the identities or experiences I was showing up as, and as I've come of age and also come into myself, reminding others that you get all of me when you get me. You can't I can't just kind of pull out or siphon out parts of me. And so I appreciate that articulation, both in terms of the many identities and the multiple identities you come from, but also how that relates to who your people are as well. Um, the next question is,
It's a
when
really
was
good
the last
question.
time that
I
you felt brave?
define bravery as doing whatever you're doing fearlessly. So the last time I felt brave was leading with my colleagues and winning the Ketanji Brown Jackson confirmation campaign. We had the opportunity to lead from the field perspective, from the field mobilization, working with people in the states. And that's the latest time where I felt fearless, that I had everything that I needed to succeed, and that I was in a space where I was utilizing everything that I had in this moment upon what I was called to do to win. And because I wanted to win so badly, I knew that I was fearless in that moment, and I was in control of what I was able to offer tangibly, emotionally, and in terms of just getting the job done and winning, and knowing that it means so much in terms of who I am, who we are, and what this means in American history.
Mm, that's awesome. Well, congratulations. I know I've said this to you before, but in the spirit of you lifting it up now, congratulations, especially since it's also since that moment now that they haven't been officially sworn in to serve as well, and so truly historic and
Indeed.
historic moment to
I was just saying,
celebrate.
indeed. It was
Um,
it
go
was incredible,
ahead.
and I think it's because I was able to
Okay.
be in the service of my vision, as Audre Lorde would say, to really be in a space where I could uh, put my energy in that service of the vision and the goal. I it wasn't important whether or not I was afraid, as Audre Lorde would say, because we have to remember that courage is being fearful, but still just doing it anyway. You're acting in spite of your fear. So we're courageous in our actions. Um,
Hmm.
but when it comes to bravery, it's doing it fearlessly. And I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity, really the opportunity to be brave.
Mm, I love that. You know, so this particular campaign is clearly one of many campaigns and efforts that you've been a part of through your extensive career in organizing and in politics and in advocacy. Um, and um, I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about, was there a particular moment, or were there particular things that led you to this path that made you want to really pursue
Sure.
the career
I
that
will first
you've
start off by saying
decided to
I was
pursue?
not a political kid. I was not, I've never seen an episode of The West Wing. um, while I grew up a nerd who loved maps. It wasn't anything that I really made the connection of the political. The civic, sure, what it means to care about voting and being in community. But at the same time, the political aspect isn't anything that really happened um, until college for most people. So it was in college where I was able to make that connection between loving what it meant to engage with others, civically and community, um, in different areas of life, um, but then understanding not just community or engagement, but power and what it means to utilize power to achieve a goal. That came in college, especially as I had a better understanding of who I was in the world and what that meant for my education, what that meant for my family and interacting with my family, and what it meant for me as a person in the queer community, and how I learned during those days that I am politicized against my will. These laws that are on the books aren't things that I voted for. So what does it mean for me to take an ownership over who I am in this body? And what does it mean for me? Um, what does it mean for me to understand how I can take part in the world as a person who's politicized against their will and own my own power? And from that point, alter relations of power and create concrete improvements, not only in my own life, but then also help other people learn how to do the same. The self-interest is there, and that's not a bad thing. That's a real thing. And that's something I hope that most people can understand. But once you understand what interests you and what's in your own interest, what can you do to help other people achieve their own self-interest, to protect themselves, to protect their families, and to be in community with each other as we seek to build a better world? Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a follow-up to that I'd love to ask is, can you share some examples of maybe some of the local or state campaigns or candidates or organizations that you worked with, and how has that helped prepare you or ground you or help build your like analysis skill set framework
Absolutely. So, being
in doing work
involved
at the national
as
level?
a younger person back in my home state of Wisconsin, um, I was involved, I would say, in maybe two or three main arenas related to political activity. One is in higher education and youth organizing, and that was through United Council of University of Wisconsin students as well as U.S. Student Association. And it was there where I learned about what I've called over the years the cycle of civic engagement. Of course, elections matter. Every election is the most important election. When people say I already voted, it's just like saying I fed the baby yesterday. We still got work to do. There's something to do today. So, of course, there is the electoral activity, there's the legislative activity that comes after that, and the accountability activity to hold those decision makers to what they said they would do or to higher standards related to what we care about. So it was through United Council and the U.S. Student Association I was able to really learn that cycle of civic engagement, how it affects my own life, and understand uh, how decision makers' choices affect my life in terms of tuition, in terms of grant aid, on the federal level, in terms of interest rates on loans, having loans altogether, as education should be free. Education is a right, it is a human right, and to receive education for free is a human right. Um, so that's where I learned more about civic engagement and politics and how those interplay with each other. Through the Fair Wisconsin campaign, that's where I learned more about the politicization of, for example, queer people. So in Wisconsin, it was already on the books at that point prior to marriage equality. So this was in about 2004, 5, 6, a campaign to ensure that there would not be an anti-LGBT amendment added to the Constitution in regards to same-sex marriage. In Wisconsin, like many other states during this time, marriage was declared between a man and a woman. And with that said, a political wedge was utilized during the Bush administration to further cement uh, uh, conservative and sadly in many cases anti-civil and human rights legislators across the country utilizing these referenda or these ballot measures. So it was through Fair Wisconsin that I not only learned about the politicization of queer people, and of course, many cases against our will as younger queer people, but then also ballot measures. I learned about door knocking and class reps and tabling and going to churches and standing outside supermarkets and teaching others how to do the same in terms of tried and true grassroots tactics that do work when you put in the work. So on a weekly basis, I was taking part in weekend canvases and getting others out in the community, going to different communities across the state in Wisconsin, working on phone banking shifts, also engaging students, engaging fellow folks of color in Wisconsin through specific outreach. So that consistent outreach and engagement and organizing, even though we knew the odds were stacked against us, we knew that it was important in terms of building a base and making sure that we were staying in touch with people related to the issue of LGBT equality, which of course is interrelated to so many other issues, economic justice, the list can go on, reproductive justice, as I mentioned, the list can go on. So it's through those organizations and through internships and the ability to be a leader in those spaces and take chances and make mistakes from a favorite TV show of mine as a kid, we had the opportunity to become leaders in our own right and understand more so what does it mean to be a political leader, to have a following, and to engage with decision makers, whether they are the electors themselves or the decision makers in City Hall, the State House, or the university regents or trustees.
Thank you, Cedric.
Yeah,
I'm curious if you could talk a little. I know you've also done different campaigns with candidates, and can you talk a little bit about what's the difference from your perspective of like running or being a part of like a candidate campaign versus an issue
yeah.
campaign, and
When I became
yeah, and how
more
did you navigate that?
comfortable with being political, it was something that wasn't necessarily something I was comfortable with. It didn't come natural to me, as I mentioned earlier. Then I knew that if I were to pursue this as a career, I would need to gain some additional experience. So, as you had mentioned, um, there were electoral campaigns, there were issue-based campaigns, there were ballot measures, but I didn't really take part in candidate campaigns. I did a little bit in terms of volunteering, but not as an organizer. I knew that I needed to have an understanding of how candidates are elected to understand how to best work with decision makers if and when they are elected from their candidacy. So the differences I found in that campaign uh, style of campaign work is understanding what does it mean for potential voters to connect with the candidate? How do they see their self-interest being represented in aligning themselves with the candidate, for voting for the candidate, supporting for the candidate, voting, vouching, volunteering? How can we make sure that there is a connection between that self-interest, regardless of what level engagement there is between that potential voter and that candidate? Also understanding that in different areas of the country, there are different ways in which constituents and potential voters work together to get candidates elected, let alone hold candidates accountable. So when I have worked in Philly, I was not as um, I was not as adept in understanding how precinct leaders or ward captains, as they're called in other places like Ohio or Chicago, how they work together in these major metropolitan areas to engage their neighbors, and to really make it hyper local in terms of how they're working with those potential voters. So I've learned more about that here in DC. There are the ANCs, the neighborhood commissions, and those commissioners. But what I learned from candidate campaigns is, what does it mean to align themselves with the candidate, to build coalition, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about, but then also to really make those hyper local connections with potential voters to make sure that they are getting out to vote. Because if we don't engage in what I call retail politics, those individual touches, those hyperlocal touches, the to be quite frank, in some ways, transactional engagements. I engage with you, you're engaging with me. There is a transaction that's happening. If that's not happening consistently with all the voters you want to engage, you're not going to get them out. When it comes time for get out the vote, we don't have those connections that we've made with people. The icing on the cake is going for the events and, getting those major candidates to show up to just push them over the edge. But what I learned is that deep engagement and that understanding of those local voters through those different surrogates at every level is so important.
Mm. I know you mentioned coalition building, so why don't we kind of follow that thread a little bit more? So from those experiences on different campaigns to your work now at the Leadership Conference, which is a coalition-based organization with more than 200 members, which I've had the chance to be at least a representative of different membership organizations, including most recently the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance of the AFL-CIO. What has working with so many groups and on these
Absolutely.
various
I will first
campaigns
say I live by
taught you
three
about
tenets of
coalition
coalition building
building?
that I have learned from a former boss and very much a mentor of mine, Wade Henderson, who says that in coalition there is strength. And it's important just to name that, to understand that we are strong when we are unified and we are all working together to advance a particular cause. And then also, we can't win, especially in the 21st century, if we are not working in coalition. Potentially, the NRA, the AARP, and maybe those are the only two, are two major organizations that can win alone. And even then, they're working with so many other organizations around the issues that they care about and want to advance. So it is so important to understand that in this current political climate, in terms of who we are in this country at this moment, we cannot win unless we're working in coalition in this 21st century. And then finally, to have a friend, you have to be a friend. So what does it mean to put yourself out there first and to make it known that you are ready and willing to work with uh, a known ally, a potential ally, someone who may be an unlikely ally, and work with them to advance a particular issue that we agree upon. And so those three are the tenets that I really work. Those are what I lead with as I work in coalition. But also say this, that I love coalition work because it's a challenge. It is inherently a challenge because in one way or another, we're gonna have to think through, how can we hold our decision makers accountable? How can we be on the same page when it comes to goals? How can we effectively collaborate when it comes to our organizational considerations, like how much money do we have? How much money does it take to run a tactic? Can we pool our resources to do something we could never do alone? What does it look like to effectively hold our targets accountable and bring in the right people to hold those targets accountable, even in some cases where someone in the coalition may be the wrong person to try to bring in to hold those folks accountable? or to engage media and bring in the right spokespeople in a moment to really bring attention to an issue. So my strategy will always uh, utilize coalition, considering that there's always an opportunity for us to work together, whomever that we is. And if there is no we, if there's really no way that I can work with another organization to try to make something work, then I have to reconsider and ask myself, are they my opposition? Are they on the same page as me when it comes to trying to move forward on any given civil and or human right? So coalition to me is so exciting because if I want to win, I need to work in coalition. If I want to engage disparate communities around one particular cause, I got to work in coalition. If I need to hold a decision maker accountable and I'm not the right person to maybe be in the room for any given scenario, then I can reach out to someone else whom I'm working with in coalition so that we can inch closer to our victory and our win.
Mhm. Absolutely. Um, I appreciate you kind of talking about the framework in which you think about coalition, some of the lessons, and even the considerations around like if there's not a coalition, if there are not folks you can work with, then we would like there needs to be at least some interrogation and some assessment around like should we even do this? And are there other things that we're not even aware of or considering as it relates to what it would mean to advance this policy or this demand or this campaign? And then you also talked about kind of the current political climate.
Absolutely.
You know, I like to say sometimes like the political and cultural climate. And I'm seeing a lot of
Yes.
new folks, not necessarily young folks, but new folks getting politicized. You know, from everything related to the pandemic, the ongoing global pandemic, to the uprisings, and of
Yes.
course the movement for Black Lives, the ongoing kinds of violence, like particularly systemic violence that continues to happen, the kind of attacks, particularly on like trans and gender nonconforming and non-binary folks. Um, what advice do you offer, or what advice could you offer to new and upcoming organizers as they are being politicized in this kind of like political and cultural climate, and how and what
Great
that might
question.
mean in terms
I,
of
of course,
how they should
can best come
approach
from my own
this work?
experience, and I encourage anyone who's starting out in this work to start out where you are and to start out from your own self-interest. And from that point, you will gain a better understanding of how to best engage politically in this work. I am so grateful that I didn't start off from being in, for example, the Democratic Party. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with party politics in terms of a start in political engagement or civic engagement. But for me, understanding the intersection of my identities, many of them marginalized, the having to hold and wrestle with what does it mean to have identities of privilege and marginalization. I was able to best understand how to wrestle with that in a political setting and framework that was for people who looked like me or who operated in the world like me. I'll also say, so not necessarily just who you are and who affects you and what affects you, but to that end, your self-interest. For me, it was uh, tuition and the fact that I came to University of
Mm-hmm.
Wisconsin paying tuition out of pocket because my first semester I was paying $2,012 per semester, believe it or not, along with the segregated fees with that entire package. So when there was a $250 million cut to the University of Wisconsin system, while I was a student on campus and tuition went up, I know that I was not the only student who was paying out of pocket and had the ability to do so. But I did see other students take that semester off move into jobs that they could just work in Madison. And there is dignity in that. At the same time, there is dignity in understanding where I could engage in the fight politically to hold those decision makers accountable in the short and the long term. So for anyone looking to engage in politics, I encourage you to look within and to interrogate what is important to you and how from there you should engage. And from that point, becoming a part of a base building organization, an organization that engages people like you from the point where you are of interest, and understand from there how you can become a leader in your own right and for yourself. And then from that point, potentially a leader in that organization and politically, because you cannot win unless you are in continued organization. It just does not happen. You cannot win continuously if you are not in continued organization. So again, understand what impacts you. What is your self-interest? Who are you? And what does that mean in terms of the world that we live in? And understanding how to get involved in an organization of people like you. And from there, taking part in the tactics, in the organization, and in the campaigns to seek those concrete victories and improvements in our lives.
I appreciate you kind of regrounding and reminding of the important work related to college affordability and accessibility, and the kinds of budget campaigns, tuition and fee campaigns that needed to be had. And I know with some of the work and campaigns that connected us initially, you mentioned as you were organizing with United Council in Wisconsin, and I was organizing with the University of California Student Association. Um, and for me, that a bridge point, because then we went from being student organizers to then working for the state organizations, and then eventually ended up working together at the United States Student Association. And I think this is a nice bridge to the next set of questions around International Human Rights Day, because it was also through the U.S. Student Association. And the International Student Association didn't formally exist, but there was still a network of student associations and student organizations from across the globe that were in community, were in relationship, and I learned or got it was even further politicized to know like the state of education, and particularly higher education in the United States, and how that was so different compared to so many other countries and places in the world. And so just that's coming up for me as I kind of want to move us into this next couple of questions about International Human Rights Day, which is celebrated every year on December 10th. So that'll be tomorrow, or at least in this current moment that we're having this conversation. And so for my first question for you is, why do you think it's important to celebrate International Human Rights Day? And what are ways that you celebrate?
I will start off by sharing a quote from a colleague of mine, Sakira Cook, who's now a Color of Change, where she, and I'm paraphrasing here, she says that civil rights are what our government confers upon us, and human rights are simply what we have by the virtue of being here in the world. And being at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and then that name was updated from Civil Rights to Civil and Human Rights in around 2009, what it has taught me by being here at this organization is there is an inherent link in between civil and human rights. And we in the United States have a pretty good hold on what civil rights are. So whether that is the ability to participate in public life through public facilities, or voting rights, or housing rights, or the ability for people across different marginalized communities over time, people with disabilities, communities of color, LGBT individuals. Civil rights we concentrate on a regular basis. Right now in Congress, we are pushing toward the passage of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. That is a matter of civil rights. Of course, to restore the Voting Rights Act to its full power over these past almost 10 years. With that said, we don't necessarily have in this country a really strong grasp on what human rights are. And that is, I think, because we concentrate on maintaining these civil rights, what our government is conferring upon us, and holding that government accountable to do so. And what's so exciting about a human rights framework is that it gives us the opportunity to even go beyond what is recognized as a right through our own government, through our own frame of government, through our own constitution, and to think even more broadly about what is possible. What a moment that we get to share, Greg, because we have lived by the mantra education is a right. But at the same time, as I mentioned before, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I have a copy of it on my wall here, you may see, one of the 30 of those articles is that education is a right. It is a human right and it should be free. And we have worked toward that as a broad student movement over generations, as a broad youth movement over generations. It is not by chance or happenstance that we were able to collectively, in this moment, work toward a victory of partial student loan forgiveness. Education should be free and there shouldn't be any loans. That is about it being a human right. And from that point, making that human right a civil right. So when I think of celebrating International Human Rights Day, I'm thinking about how much farther can we push this this governance structure, our elected officials, to ensuring that individuals have the opportunity to live freely, to be, and I'm looking some notes here, to be free and to live with their own dignity and to take part in the rights that are conferred upon them. And of course, to expand from that point and to petition government. So that's what I think about with human rights. I think about what we have by virtue of being here and working for our governments, plural. So not just on the national level, but state and local, but then internationally, together in global coalition to ensure that these human rights are fully respected, and also taking into account that a document like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not only it only references or has roots in the United States Constitution, or even in the Magna Carta, but also in the Iroquois Confederacy, Great Law of Peace, that there are indigenous communities around the world that contribute to this understanding of what human rights should be and what it means for us to live up to that. So I know that there are many people in the world who look at human rights or look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a pie in the sky type of situation. You know, human rights, that's right up there with world peace. But what does it take for us to get there? And what does it take for us to be in a space where we can respect the contributions of everyone in society and ensure that we're giving people an equal chance? I think of hope when I think of human rights. I think of potential when I think of human rights. I think of excitement. I think of connection. And I'm so excited that I have the opportunity to celebrate International Human Rights Day on this platform, and I'll be doing it on others.
Absolutely. I appreciate you giving the one example of the kind of Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. Can you share what are some other examples and what are some other efforts that for folks who are, one, kind of looking to celebrate or to honor International Human Rights Day and to just kind of continue to be engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. So
I'll
I'll start off at the local level. So if there are civil rights or human rights-based legislation that you're pushing on the local level, I always say with my colleagues, let's go to the calendar. Let's find a way to make a hook around something that we care about. So if you're pushing for any given civil or human rights for your city council, your county board, utilize International Human Rights Day as a hook to get people excited about what you're working on. If it's related to a democracy issue like voting or redistricting, or utilizing census data. Participation in government is a human right. Therefore, we should be expanding those rights on the local level or the state level. Um, when it comes to justice reform, unnecessary detainment and imprisonment, anything along those lines is a human right. No one should have to endure that. So on the state level, if you're working on justice reform, International Human Rights Day is a hook. It's a way of making people understand that it's not just about human dignity. It's about it being a human right and standing in that power. On the federal level, which of course that's where the bulk of my work on a day-to-day basis is in this office, it's not just the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, but it's also the child tax credit that has been utilized. So being able to utilize any type of benefits from your government is a human right, and having access to those resources, that is a human right. So framing it not just as a matter of a pocketbook angle, but it being a human right to be able to utilize said tax credit. I always tell people, it's your money, it's a tax credit. So let's think about who's trying to make sure that we get that money and put it back in our pocket, and who's trying to keep it away from you. Let's always keep that in mind. Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, as I mentioned. So it's not just about the ability to be in the workplace as a pregnant worker, but to also be able to have simple and reasonable accommodations like carrying a water bottle, being able to take an additional break, having a certain amount of, having a limit on the amount of pounds that someone has to carry while they're pregnant. This is some basic human dignity embedded in the legislation. And this is a human right to be able to engage in the workplace with these accommodations. So these are, of course, some of the major activities that are happening right now on Capitol Hill that we're trying to push. But I would be also remiss if I didn't mention what it means to confirm judges who are champions of civil and human rights. So with that said, we have a number of these judges who are, these judicial nominees who are up for a final vote. So please encourage your senator, if you do reside in a location with a senator, to confirm those judges, because every senator votes on every judge, from the Supreme Court on down to the federal courts that I'm sure are no more than about 100 or 200 miles away from you in your community, that are always making decisions related to civil and human rights, whether that is related to the mask mandate in the pandemic, to voting rights, to environmental rights, to LGBT justice. We just have seen that previously this week at the Supreme Court. But every single day, some judge somewhere is making a decision on the district court or circuit court level, the lower court level, that impacts all of us nationwide. So please, of course, take the time also to engage your decision makers on every level related to not just what can be done in your legislature, that first branch of government, but then also the second, your mayor, your governor, your president, but that mysterious, mystical branch, the third branch. You have power there. And and if there's anything that I leave you with in terms of the work that I do on a regular basis, is that you have power not only when it comes to holding these elected decision makers accountable in the first and second branch of government, but also the third. And it is really, it has been the work of my career here at the Leadership Conference, and broadly, since it's the majority of it, to demystify, diversify, and democratize the third branch of government. So please continue to understand how we can do that, and how engaging in your government is a human right.
Yeah. Thank you, Cedric, for laying all of that out. And one thing that's coming up for me as you're saying all that is, there are lots of opportunities to be involved. There are lots of things to be connected to or to plug into at the various levels of not only government, but the kinds of organizations and efforts that there are. And I think just one thing that I would kind of build off of, or I'd like to also kind of invite, is that as I've been politicized and I have been learning more about both the kind
Yes.
of the way in which government politics and government interact here within the context of the U.S. is also the connectivity and just how just how much it's connected internationally, globally. I would say that there is uh, across the globe right now a growth in conservatism, a growth in authoritarianism that I think is really challenging folks to really understand, to have this idea of like, okay, what does it mean to not only care about myself? What does it mean to care about my neighbor, like in my little neighborhood? But how do we actually think about this
Yes.
from a global context? And especially, as an example for myself as like a Filipino American, someone who lives in the United States but has roots and family in the Philippines, um, like I think about that quite often, honestly. Like, okay, well, how am I contributing, or what are things that I can do in that
Yes.
regard? And I think it's a helpful thing that you talk about that all of these things are connected. And so as we are engaged locally and as we kind of live out and push out our values at the local level, and more of those folks then get to state and to then federal, that then supports and helps kind of continue to expand the number of folks or the number of people, including elected officials and whatnot, who share or at least understand where, like, how we are grounded in the people who are our people, and how and why it's important to try to think as globally as possible, even as we are engaged at the most hyper local of levels. And so wanted to offer that, and that's something that I know I'm going to think about, especially on International Human Rights Day. What Something that I will try to draw more connections to. Um, so thank you for helping provide a strong foundation, and also things to consider for folks for today, tomorrow, and for
Absolutely.
really
Pardon me with
as
that
we
one
continue
finger.
to move
That was my
forward.
boss, the amazing Maya Wiley, who was like, "Come here." I'm like, "1 second." Uh, so own your power at every step of the way.
No worries. No
Yeah,
worries. No worries, Cedric. We're, there's two questions left that I wanted to ask. One, the second and last question I have for you, and this is something we like to invite,
that's a
is there
really
a
great,
question, or is there
really
anything
good
that you would
question.
like to
Question with a
ask me?
question. Um, in this new Congress that we have, moving into the 118th Congress, so um, a House led by Representative McCarthy, soon to be Speaker, most likely we'll see, um, a Senate led by Senator Chuck Schumer, and President Joe Biden. Do you see any potential victories in terms of human rights that can be advanced? And if not, then what can we do in this moment to not look back on these 2 years that will come quickly, and look back and think, man, what a waste?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you. I appreciate this question, because I think it's been something that I have been reflecting on, especially as we've found out more and more results of the elections over the last month or so, from election day, including the recent runoffs that happened in Georgia. And I think, one, to be honest with you, I don't have the highest hopes of the strongest legislation, if let alone any that I think would include kind of the types of things that I would like. However, I do think that there is an interesting politicization moment, a moment that particularly progressives and folks within the Democratic Party could be able to use the next 2 years as a way to really make clear around particular values and particular ideas about what people, and kind of tying it back in, like, what are the civil and human rights that folks deserve, and what are steps closer to justice for all of us. And so I think that the question for me is, how will progressives and how will Democratic Party leaders leverage the moment to do so? Are they going to call out the Trump and MAGA extreme type politics? Are they going to call out the use of governance to kind of poke at particular individuals instead of trying to, or political appointees, versus trying to advance key issues that folks are really caring about and are feeling the kind of the impacts of each and every day. And so I think that there's an opportunity on that front to kind of really shape and kind of set things up for some of the local municipal elections in 2023, but also, of course, the 2024 major presidential election that's going to happen. And so I think there's lots of opportunity that could help set up and hopefully be able to hold the line around the some of the potential shifts, and to kind of set up a very justice focused, civil human rights focused agenda and framework.
Absolutely. I think that is
in the coming years.
one prong of a multi-pronged approach that I know that and I and so many other people will be working on.
Yes. Well, thank you for that question, Cedric. My final question for you as we get ready to close out this conscious conversation is, how can people stay in touch with you? How could folks
absolutely.
Follow what you and the Leadership Conference up to?
I am
share
on
all the things.
The gram at CSEDGO. That's SEECEDGO. And often I post different calls to action related to the campaigns that I mentioned previously, and of course more, whether it's just learning about what cases at the Supreme Court, or giving you the full 10-digit hotline to call your senator, your representative, make those calls. I often post there. I post more on Twitter, whatever Twitter can be these days. And my Twitter handle is said so, and that is CEDSAIDSO. Said so. Then, in addition, all the work I'm doing, of course, is for the most part housed within the Leadership Conference, and we are on almost every social media platform outside of TikTok, and we're working on that. But you can find us at civilrights.org. So civilrights.org. And there we have letters that have gone to the Hill, different calls to action, videos, you name it, things that you can share. And I'll say two last things. One, you can reach out to me individually, and I'll get back to that. But if you are working in a national organization of any kind, I really suggest that you go to our website, because chances are you might be in the coalition. And from there, I'm more than happy to connect with you. And I will close with saying that you can always reach out to me individually. I've worked with so many different advocates who have reached out to me via cold call, just calling our office, or reaching out with any type of question via email or even DM. And from there, building out really strong connections on how they can hold their decision makers accountable in their jurisdictions. And that has been truly the joy of this work. And I can't say that enough. Never feel like you can't reach out to someone to figure out how to make an improvement in your own life. Believe in yourself, enough to know that you can always reach out to people who are prepared and ready to help you. And that, of course, is in this realm and in others. So when it comes to any type of civic engagement you're doing or political work, know that you can always reach out. And if I can't help, I will try to find someone who can.
Mm. Cedric is being so sincere, y'all, in that call out. So I hope folks take that seriously, and I hope folks follow Cedric on Instagram and Twitter, follow the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Cedric, for being our esteemed guest. Thank you, Jenny, for serving as our interpreter. Thank you, Melissa, our accessibility coordinator, for helping coordinate the accessibility services. And thank you to everyone who checked out this conversation. This is our last one of 2022. We have an exciting, we already have an exciting list of folks that we're going to bring on in 2023. And I felt having Cedric close us out for 2022 was a nice way to cap off what has been a year of ups and downs and highlights and challenges, but lots of lessons, lots of stories, lots of experiences. So thank you. Wishing you, Cedric, wishing everyone checking this out either live or by video, and everyone the happiest of holidays, the much rest, care, and rejuvenation this winter season, and look forward to staying in touch.